Today, we're diving into a question that sounds like it's straight out of science fiction, but it's very, very real. We're talking about so-called forever chemicals and a potential hidden link to obesity.
So let's just jump right in with the big question. We all know the basics, right? Diet and exercise are the foundation of weight management. But what if there's another player on the field? A hidden factor. What if invisible chemicals, all around us in our daily lives, could actually be making it harder for us to maintain a healthy weight?
To even start answering that, you need to meet the main character in our story, a group of chemicals called PFAS. Now, that's short for a very long name, but what you really need to know is their nickname, forever chemicals. And they're called that for a reason. You see, they're built around this incredibly powerful carbon-fluorine bond. It's one of the strongest bonds in chemistry, which means these things just don't break down. Not in the soil, not in the water, and not inside our bodies.
And that's a big deal, because these chemicals are literally everywhere. They're in non-stick cookware, in stain-resistant carpets, in food packaging, and yep, even in our drinking water. So for most of us, the main way we're exposed is simply by eating and drinking every single day.
And that all leads us to the core mystery we're unpacking today. Could these chemicals that persist in our environment and in our bodies be a secret, unseen driver of weight gain? It's a question that scientists are taking very seriously. The theory revolves around this key idea, the obesogen. And obesogen isn't just any chemical. It's a specific type of foreign compound that's thought to mess with our body's normal metabolic processes. It basically hijacks the system, and the end result could be an increased risk of obesity. It's a pretty wild idea that really challenges how we think about weight.
So how would a chemical even do that? If PFAS are potential obesogens, what's the actual mechanism? Well, let's follow the evidence, kind of like a detective, all the way to the crime scene, which in this case is inside our own cells.
Think of it like a four-step heist. First, we ingest the PFAS through food or water. Second, they get into our bloodstream and grab onto proteins to travel around the body. Now, step 3 is where the real trickery happens. Their shape is so similar to the natural fatty acids our body uses for fuel that our cells are fooled into letting them in. And once they're inside, that's step 4, disruption. They start messing with the cell's internal machinery.
And they have a very specific target. These critical molecular switches inside our cells called PPARs. Think of PPARs as the control panel for how our body handles fat, how it stores it, how it uses it, even how it creates new fat cells. So when PFAS get in and start flipping these switches, they can throw that whole finely tuned system out of whack.
And here's where the problem just explodes in scale. We're not talking about one chemical. Scientists have identified over 7,800 different types of PFAS, and more are being developed. So trying to study the specific health effects of every single one, it's a monumental challenge.
Okay, so that's the theory of how it could work. But what about the evidence from studies on actual people? Well, this is where the story gets, let's say, a lot more complicated.
When you look at the research, you get this really conflicting picture. On one hand, you have major studies that find a link. They show that when mothers are exposed to PFAS during pregnancy, their kids, especially girls, tend to have higher body fat down the line. But then, you have other studies that find no significant connection at all. And to make it even weirder, some studies find the opposite, that certain PFAS are linked to lower birth weights. It's a great example of how science is often a messy, ongoing process.
And hey, don't just take my word for it. Here's a quote from a 2024 scientific review that this whole explainer is based on. The researchers put it plainly, saying the data shows mixed and inconclusive findings that underscore the complexity of how PFAS affect us. The bottom line? We're still figuring this out.
So if the human data is so messy, how do scientists make any progress at all? Well, they can't rely on just one type of evidence. They have to piece together clues from a whole toolkit of research methods.
So they look at it from all angles. You have the epidemiological studies, looking at big human populations over time. Then you have in vivo studies, which means research in living organisms, like mice. You can zoom in even more with in vitro studies, which are experiments done on cells in a petri dish. And then there's the newest tool in the box, in silico studies.
These in silico studies are basically powerful computer simulations.
and they are becoming absolutely essential. Why? Well, remember those 7,800 plus chemicals? You could never test all of them on mice or in cell cultures. It would take forever and cost a fortune. But with computer models, scientists can rapidly screen thousands of them, flagging the ones that look most toxic and telling them where to focus their lab work.
Okay, so the science is moving fast, but it's incredibly complex. So let's zoom out and look at what this means for the real world, for the people making the rules, the companies making the products, and for all of us.
To see just how challenging this is, just look at this chart. It shows the safety guidelines for one single type of PFAS in drinking water across different countries. Canada says 600 nanograms per liter is the guideline. Germany says 300. But then look at the US EPA. Their health advisory is 0.004. It's so low you can't even see it on this chart. That's 150,000 times difference between the US and Canadian levels. It just goes to show you, there is absolutely no global agreement on what safe even means.
Now, there is some movement on the corporate front. 3M, which was one of the biggest pioneers of PFAS, has promised to stop making them completely by the end of 2025. And that's a massive deal. But it's not the end of the story. Production is still happening in other places, and decades worth of these forever chemicals are already out there, just cycling through our ecosystem.
So it really all boils down to this. We live in a world filled with thousands of chemicals that are designed to never go away. The science is sprinting to figure out what they all do, but the evidence is complicated, and our regulations are struggling to keep up. It leaves us with this huge, unsettling question to think about. In a world like this, how do we even begin to define what's safe?